from Pirkei Avot, chapter 2, Mishnah 6. Let's go. So it says, Hu haya omer, right? Hillel says, Ein bur yerechet, that a brute or a boor is not sin-fearing. Velo amaaretz chasid, nor is an ignorant person pious. Velo habaishan lamed, nor can a timid person learn. Velo hakapdan melamed, nor can an impatient person teach. Velo chol hamarve bischora machkim, nor will someone who engages too much in business become wise. Uvimkom shein anashim hishtadel liot ish, in a place where there are no men, strive to be a man. Okay, so we're not going to be able to unpack this entire Mishnah, but we'll definitely get a start, and we'll get a good start starting with the Maharal in Derech Chaim. So he opens with a number of excellent questions, and I want to focus on towards the end of them. And he asks something that is just so earth-shattering for me, because that's kind of the way I was learning the Mishnah. Namely, he says, you don't learn the Mishnah as just a kind of conglomeration of nice little wise sayings. He asked me, like, why does the Mishnah express itself this way? Why is it bor and yerechet and amaretz and chasid? Why can't you say v'lo amaretz yerechet? And a bor is in a chasid. V'lo beishan lamed, like kaptan melamed. What's all these? Why this with that? Why X with Y and why A with B? What's the connection here? And he says further that many people will learn this Mishnah simply, right? They'll read and they'll take it at face value. Why can't a Baishan learn? Because he's timid. He won't ask questions. Why can't a Kaptan, right? A person who's impatient or who's punctilious about his honor, right? Why not? Because students aren't gonna ask, right? If you have a teacher who's going to explode at any question you ask, there's just no possibility of learning from such a person because the students are too afraid, they're too worried. They may not even want to move or can't even pay attention because they're so worried about this person's explosiveness, right? And a marbe b'schora, why can't the marbe b'schora become wise? Because he's busy. He's spending too much time with his business, and if he's spending too much time with his business, then he's not going to be able to become wise. So there you go. Read the Mishnah, common sense. That's that. Easy. Says the Maharal, and he expresses himself so strongly, it's worthwhile reading just the way he says it. So he says, Kvar amarnu pamim harbe. We've said this many times, which I'm assuming means he's articulated this in his other works as well. It says, She'en divrei chachamim rak chokhmah. The words of the sages are not just nice pieces of wisdom. They're not tidbits, right? They're not these like LinkedIn memes. That's not what they're doing, right? And they're not just saying things that people can come to reasonably. They think about it, they can reason it through, and then they articulate it, and there you go, you have your Mishnah, right? A Baishan can't learn, right? He's not going to ask questions. That's not what they're doing. He rejects this out of hand. He's like, that's not what's going on. He's like, any child, he says this towards the end, he's like, a child in school could tell you something like that. It's obvious. You don't need a Mishnah for that. The Mishnah is coming to teach us a Chiddush. So what is the Chiddush of the Mishnah? I'm not going to hit everything, but we'll focus on a few. So he says specifically relating to the Baishan and the Kaptan. So again, why can't the Baishan learn? Why not? So the Maharal quotes Abrasive in Beitza, right? It's one of the Masechtas in the Gemara, or in Shas. He says, why was the Torah given to the Jewish people? And the answer is because we are azim, right? We are bold. We're bold. And as a result, we have a natural connection to Torah, right? Because Torah is like fire. The pasuk says, Eish dat lamo. The Torah is fire, and fire is bold. The Jewish people are bold, and the Torah is bold, and there you go. And that's why a Baishan cannot learn. Because to learn something and internalize it, there must be a similarity, some connection between the material being learned and the person learning it. But a Baishan does not have azut. And the Torah, which is fire, which is bold, does have azut, and which means the Baishan and the Torah, they can't connect. And therefore he cannot learn. And that's the problem. What about the Kaptan? The Kaptan actually has the different spin, but same issue. In terms of what's a Kaptan? A Kaptan is a person who, the way Rashi and Rambam express it a little differently, a person who, if you ask him too many questions, right, or the same question too many times, then he'll get really upset. He's all punctilious. He's impatient. He can't deal patiently with his students. A captain, says the Maharal, is bold. He's exclusively bold. He's a firebrand. And as such, he cannot teach because he has no connection to his Talmidim. His Talmidim are not quite there yet, right? They're not 100% Azim, right? That's why they're Talmidim, right? Which means that if the teacher is 100% fire, and the students are still to some degree by Shanim, understandably, then there's no connection between the teacher and the students. They can't click. It doesn't work together. They don't mesh. And as a result, the captain can't teach. Why not? Because he can't connect to his Talmidim because he's too busy being a firebrand. Wow. Okay, and so now let's look at the last one. He says schora. And a person who transacts too much business, who engages too much in commerce, he cannot become wise. Why not? So Gemara darshans out the pasuk lo bashamayim hi, right, which means the Torah is not in gasei ruach and sacharanim, right? They're not in a arrogant people and in merchants. So we're entitled to ask, why not? And the Maharal will ask later, why not jealous people? What's so specific about gasei ruach, arrogant people? Why not jealous? Jealous people also have a serious problem, right? If this is just about poor character traits, then you can start mentioning a number of bad character traits. What is specific about gasei ruach? So the Maharal explains, the Torah, right, is not gishmi, right? Wisdom in general is not gishmi, as in it's not material, it's not physical, right? These are not physical items, and as opposed to physical items, proximity is not an issue when it comes to learning. Namely, the physical world, right? When I say this is 1,000 kilometers away, the city is 1,000 kilometers away, this university is 1,000 kilometers away, that makes sense. Or this person is 1,000 kilometers away, right? Okay, so you need to drive 1,000 kilometers and then you'll be there. There you go. Problem solved, right? And while it's certainly true that Torah ideas or wisdom in general can be elevated, right? Or they can be deep. We speak about them in terms of having physical dimensions, but they're not subject to height and width and length. Like they're not that kind of distance away from someone. An idea is not like, oh wow, yeah, this Mishnah is about like 850 kilometers away. That doesn't make any sense, right? This might be very deep, but it's not the physical distance. That's just not the way. It's like, it's 18 feet tall. What does that? You look at a person strangely if they said something like that about a type of wisdom. And so as a result, we see this actually reflected in the term used to say where Torah is not. It is not in gasei ruach, a person who's kind of like an overblown ruach. He's too big for it. He's spoken about in physical dimensions. And if you're speaking about him in physical dimensions, then he doesn't have that's not what the Torah is going to be. That's not the way it works. And how about merchants? So the Maharal quotes Breshit in 42:34. It's when Yosef and the brothers. Listen to this; it's just unbelievable. So Yosef says, right? Bring your little brother to me, right? And I will know that you're not spies. Right? I know you're honest. I will give you your brother, as in Shimon, the one who's keeping. Listen to this. Tischaru from Bishol, Socher, or in the context of our Mishnah, right? Tischaru. What does Rashi say? Tisovavu. You may go around. Which means all instances of the words socharim and schora, right, they derive from the sense of going around, because merchants travel about and go around after commerce. And so says the Maharal, we see where we're going. This is, you're going length and width and across the sea and on the plane and driving down and moving all the way about. And that's not the way wisdom and Torah, that's not the way we speak about that. Those ideas are not relevant to Torah in terms of if you're constantly moving around, then it's and the reason, but just as background, the reason why the Maharal says that it can't possibly mean, or another reason why the Maharal says it can't possibly mean that Hamar Mishor just means you're busy doing work, is because there's another Mishnah Pirkei which says marbe nechasim and marbe da'aga. Right, a person who has a lot of assets is very worried, right? Which probably means he can't spend too much time learning because he's too busy being worried about his assets, right? He has to take care of it. He has to manage his portfolio. And so the Maharal says, I don't understand what's the difference between marbe nechasim and marbe b'schora, like commerce and assets. Like, why don't you just say it? Like, a person who has a lot of money, he's busy, or a person too busy doing work, he's not going to be able to learn. Why do we have a change in terminology, right? What's the difference? And so that's what the Maharal is clarifying. He's like, what is specific about schora? The idea of being specific about schora is that merchants move around a lot all the time. They're constantly on the move. And with that, he just doesn't mean like, oh, they're busy. It means they're literally subjecting themselves to physical measures. And if they do that, then they can't relate to chokhmah. How can they be machkim? Machkim is an idea that is irrelevant. Physical proximity is not the way we speak about chokhmah, right? And as a result, they will not be able to be machkim because it's not a gishmi item. People who are socharim are constantly dealing with the gishmi. And another way he actually proves it and seals this, it's actually a really powerful idea, but he says that Ibal Schora, and actually this is reflected in Kiddushin, it's very interesting to see. When it says that a father must teach his child a malacha, the question is, does it mean a malacha as in a trade specifically, or just business? And the Gemara is not so clear, right? There's machlokas about it, because he says, because there's a difference between a malacha and schora, says the Maharal. A malacha, what does a bal malacha do, right? A tradesman, he takes a piece of wood, and then he shapes it into a chair. He's changed the item. He uses intellect, and his creativity, his chokhmah, and he asserts it onto the physical world, and he changes it. Right? The same thing with a tradesman can take a piece of leather and turn it into a shoe. Right? The physical item is transformed through the person's chokhmah. What's a merchant do? Merchant takes spice from A and brings it to B. Right? A merchant takes a big piece of land and subdivides it and sells it off. It's not adding anything. It's not contributing anything. There's no change in the product. There's no assertion of his intellect here. He's just swapping items, and as a result, there's no connection between like necessarily intellect and what he's learning. And that's how the Maharal fuses these together. Deep perspective, and we'll see you the next time.